Welcome to this learning lesson where we're going to be going over the pelvic floor structure and function and how it works very closely with our breath. So this is my pelvic floor model, and this is where the pelvic floor would sit in my body. The pelvic floor forms a sling underneath us. So these muscles attach to my pubic bone in the front, my tailbone in the back, and then my two sitting bones underneath me. So you can see how it forms this sling underneath me. And that sling holds up all of my pelvic organs. So here's my bladder, my uterus, and my rectum. And then you can also see how these pelvic floor muscles go around our urethra, or where our urine exits the body, how it goes around the vaginal opening, and then how it goes around the anus. The pelvic floor is forming a sling underneath you. And it also always has to have a little bit of tension in it as it holds up all of those organs in your pelvic bowl. And then you can also see as it encircles the urethra, vaginal opening, and anus is these muscles need to be able to contract, squeeze, and close those openings, but they also need to be able to relax and let things out of these openings, babies, urine, stool, and gas. And so if these muscles are too weak, things can leak out. And if they're too tight, we can have a hard time, sometimes painful bowel movements. Sometimes there will be some hesitancy with urinating. Intercourse will be painful. So those are sometimes indicators that these muscles are too tight. Now, a lot of people think that the pelvic floor just works in isolation. It's just a group of muscles down here and they do their own thing. But in truth, the pelvic floor works really closely with our diaphragm. If I put my fingertips right at the base of my sternum, right where my two ribcage bones meet, and I sniff, and you feel that little kick underneath your fingertips, that's where your diaphragm is. Dome-shaped muscle, and it contracts and pulls down as I take an inhale. So inhale, my diaphragm contracts and pulls down to pull air into my lungs. When my diaphragm moves down, all the contents of my abdomen and my pelvic bowl have to move downwards a little bit to accommodate that diaphragm. Then I exhale. My diaphragm moves back up. All the contents of my abdomen move back up, and my pelvic floor recoils a little bit. So I always imagine, inhale, my pelvic floor lengthens and drops towards my feet a little bit. My sitting bones, where these muscles attach, move away from each other a little bit as I take that inhale. Then exhale, my diaphragm moves back up and my pelvic floor moves back up a little bit. So as we're learning to activate and contract our pelvic floor or do a Kegel, we are going to play off that activation. So it's going to be inhale, let everything relax, open up your rib cage. Exhale, lift that pelvic floor up and in. And we're going to get into that more when we get into our action tasks. But I want you to just understand that concept. Inhale, relax everything, sit bones drift apart. Exhale, then we lift that pelvic floor up and in. And so a lot of times what happens if we're having leakage is we are losing that communication. For example, if I cough or sneeze, that is a forceful exhalation, right? I am moving like or a chew, right? That air is coming out. And when that air is coming out, I want to teach my pelvic floor to draw up and in. So we're going to practice that as we get into this a little bit more. One way we can really improve this communication between our diaphragm and our pelvic floor is to stack the diaphragm over the pelvis, especially when we're first learning that coordination between our breath and our pelvic floor. So I'm just going to show you some examples of this. So if I'm standing, and let's say I have a tendency to kind of open my abdominal wall, I'm lifting my chest, and I take an inhale here. I feel my air really come up into my chest, right? And maybe I get a lot of neck tightness because I'm breathing with my neck. And then another example is if I round, and in our action task, we'll practice these things. And I take an inhale. I really feel that go into my belly, like a lot of pressure moving my belly outward. Now, if I stack my rib cage right over my pelvis, one trick is you can put your thumbs on your lower rib cage and your pinky fingers on the tops of your hip bones, and then have those fingertips stacked, or you can lean up against a wall. But if my rib cage is stacked directly over my pelvis and I take an inhale and think about breathing into my lateral ribs and breathing into my backside. So a lot of times I'll have people put their hands on the side of their ribs. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. When I do that, I feel this even disbursement of that air between my diaphragm and my pelvic floor. I don't feel like I'm straining my neck or just breathing into my chest or just breathing into my belly. I can feel that air just ever so gently move down into my pelvic bowl. And so what I imagine, and it's super subtle, really, I'm asking you to tune into this movement that's happening in our body that we never pay attention to. But I think of this like ocean wave kind of happening all day long when we're breathing correctly and our posture is good and we've got that diaphragm communicating with our pelvic floor. That as I'm going throughout my day, I'm inhaling and letting that pelvic floor relax, and exhaling and that pelvic floor recoils. Inhaling and exhaling. And when we have that like gentle, natural movement happening with our breath and our pelvic floor, that's when we get really good blood flow. We're moving around our lymphatic fluids. Our muscles are happy because muscles like blood flow and oxygen. And so that's the pattern we want to reestablish here. That's a lot of times what we lose when we're having pelvic pain or pelvic floor muscles are tight, or if we're having leakage, maybe our pelvic floor muscles are too weak. So just want to introduce those concepts to you. So again, just like going over what we talked about. So pelvic floor is a sling underneath you that is holding up those organs that sit inside that pelvic bowl. And it attaches to your pubic bone in the front, your tailbone in the back, and your two sitting bones underneath you, giving you that support all day long. And then our breath works with our pelvic floor. So remember, inhale, our pelvic floor lengthens, softens. Exhale, that pelvic floor comes up a little bit as our diaphragm moves down and up with each breath. And then lastly, posture is very important, especially when we're first learning to connect our breath to our pelvic floor. It's best practice when we're first learning to stack our rib cage over our pelvis. All right, and we're going to take all these ideas and we're going to practice them in our action tasks. Thanks.